Hello, viewers. My name is Solomon Mdaga from the Department of Education Head Office. I'm the subject planner. Welcome to the ECDoE broadcast studio. Today's lesson is about the structure and the format, as well as the revision of question 2 of the subject agricultural management practices. Now, very importantly, it is important to understand grade 12 learners, those who are taking AMP, to understand that in terms of the structure of the paper, the subject has section A and section B. In section A, you have 4 sub-questions, and these 4 sub-questions, they constitute 1, multiple choice questions for 20 marks. The second question, it also constitutes 20 marks, which is column A and column B. You are expected to match. And then the sub-question number 3 is on correcting, giving the terminology, where you'll be given a statement or a description. You should be able to give that terminology. And then the last one in section A is you are given a statement with incorrect underlined words. You are expected to correct the underlined word using the correct one so that the statement would look correct. So that is as far as section A is concerned. Now, in section B, which is the focus of today's presentation, in section B, you have question 2, you have question 3, and you have question 4. And each question has a weighting of 50 marks. So today we'll be focusing on question 2 only, and then I will come back for question 3, and then also come back for question 4. So we have 4 questions in this subject, and they are no optional questions. All questions are compulsory, and we expect you to make sure that you answer all 4 questions. Now, let's delve into question 2. But maybe before we delve into question 2, I just want to give you what we call the nuggets or the tips for success in NSC. Number 1, it's very important that you are able to follow the instructions. It's very important here, keywords, you must follow the instructions. All questions have instructions, and the examiner expects you to follow those instructions, because flowing from the instructions, that is a route towards earning good marks. So if you don't follow the instructions, then you might end up losing marks. Secondly, you must prepare for questions which requires a comprehension and applications. If you look at our previous question papers, they test a number of things. But question 2 here is one of the questions of which we'll get into it later on, where we are testing comprehension, we're testing applications, and higher order questions which examine analytical synthesis as well as evaluation abilities of the learner. So these are the skills that we expect you to have mastered during the course of the year, so that come the time for senior certificate examination, you are ready to analyze those scenarios. Look at this. We are saying our questions here, they have picture-based, statement-based, question-based, as well as graphs and basic calculations. What does this mean? It means that in this subject called AMP, you will be given pictures. And the moment you are given pictures, we expect you to analyze the pictures. We expect the learner to analyze and make meaning of what this picture is all about. And secondly, what action verbs are used by the examiner in relation to what is it that they're testing by that picture. So picture analysis is very critical. Statement-based questions, where we expect you to read with understanding. Read what the examiner is looking for. Read those statements that we are given there. Fortunately, most of our statements, they're about 3 statements, 6 statements, just short, simple paragraphs where they are giving you information. So read that paragraph, read those statements, understand, and as you read them, underline also the key words in these statements, because out of those keywords, that is where the sub-questions and the follow-up questions will come from. Also, we have graphs. So make sure that you know that in this subject, there are graphs that we expect you to be able to interpret the graphs, to plot the graphs, to know the calibrations in the graphs, to know the variables, to know the caption in the graph. So those are, if you look at the graphs, those are low-hanging fruits, if I may say so, because with any graph, you are given about 5 or 6 marks, and it's easy for a learner to know that in graphing and interpretation, what is it that is expected, and they will expect you, one, to analyze what this graph is all about. Having analyzed, then you go to your action verbs. Hence, if you look at this, where we're saying mastery of key concept per topic is very important. What do I mean by that? In agricultural management practices, we have key concepts. You have your precision farming, for example. You have your soil degradation, for example. So as a learner, we expect you to know what is precision farming, what is soil degradation, what is intensive method of farming, what is a commercial system. So we expect you to know that. So that's why we're saying you need to master. You need to master key concept per topic. In other words, each and every topic that was introduced in class as we're starting a particular topic, make sure that you are able to define those concepts, you are able to understand those concepts, and you are able to apply, that is the usage, how they are used. Now, one thing that will help you is looking at all the action verbs in the previous question papers. If you take your previous question papers, 2020, 2021, 2023, up to 2024, then you'll see that you have a lot of describe, identify, deduce, motivate, justify, recommend, indicate, and many other action verbs. So your action verbs are the tools that you need to master. Where do you get them? You get them from the previous question papers, because these action verbs will help you to say, for example, if it is a graph, what is it that the examiner expects from me as the learner? The examiner expects you to deduce from the graph, to identify, to describe, or to discuss, or to list. Very, very importantly. Now, practice answering different types of questions. Now, you link this with what I said earlier on, the plotting and the interpretation of graphs, which is also called data response type of questions. You need to practice how graphs are drawn. You need to practice the interpretation that we expect from you. And lastly, on these tips, you need to understand these very important 2 concepts. The concept of demand, you need to understand and be able to define and identify in a graph what is being demanded, depending on how the graph is plotted. And also, you must be able to identify in a graph what is it that is being supplied. Demand and supply. Always when we talk about demand and supply, is the supply of the agricultural commodities, is the demand of the agricultural commodities, which are demanded by the consumers. So we usually present them in the form of a graph. You always have graphs that are depicting this demand as well as supply. Let's move on, Madam. We get to what this presentation, the gist of it, where I said, for today's purposes, I want us to look at question 2. We'll look at what are the key concepts in question 2, and how are they being examined? I've said already that Section B has 3 questions, question 2, question 3, and question 4. And now we're only going to do this question 2, focusing on physical farm planning. So I want you, Bandawam, to understand what is this physical farm planning and why it has to be done, what are the advantages of doing it correctly, and what are the disadvantages if it is not done correctly. Look, we are, as agriculturists, we are in the space of food production, and we are expected to always maximize food production. And for us to be able to maximize and sustain food production and make a contribution to food security, then we need to make sure that the basic concepts of farming, of agriculture, are known by all learners who are taking agriculture as a subject. Hence, now I'm saying physical farm planning, we're talking about the farming resources. When we talk about farming resources here, we're talking about land, we're talking about the soil, we're talking about the temperature, we're talking about the climate, we're talking about the rainfall patterns, we're talking about, and all those that are making contribution in making sure that we maximize food production. And we'll also get to the farming systems. Now, what are some of the key concepts here, and how are you expected to approach this question too? As you can see, it's a structured question, which means everything here is logical, it is in order. One, you will expect you learners to know key concepts. That's number one. Number two, you must be able to interpret these concepts. As I said, if we talk of soil degradation, you must know what is soil degradation. And you must be able to interpret pictures that are depicting soil degradation. You must be able to also see how can we correct that soil degradation, because we are in the business of making sure that we maximize food production. So if we allow farming practices that would lead to soil degradation, obviously that will affect food security, food production, and the sustainability, and also making sure that we are considerate to the environment. And also, and very lastly on this key concept, with the master of key concepts, interpretation of the concept in a graph or in pictures, you must also be able to see how it is applied. That is very, very important. Let's take, for example, here, the first point here, functions of soil in crop production. It's very important that in your question papers, when you are asked this question, you must also look whether this function of soil, is it in crop production? Because sometimes learners are tempted just to give generalized functions of soil, whereas the examiner was looking for in crop production, which is very, very important. So we expect you here to give the examiner here the functions of soil in soil production. They provide their medium for seed germination. They provide the medium of making sure that plant roots they grow in there, supply air, that is soil aeration, and so forth. Also, soil here is always saying something to us as agriculturists, as farmers, as learners. Soil is also saying something to us. You look at the soil, the color of the soil, and then you should be able to interpret that, so that what information is the soil saying to us? We need to be able to interpret and understand that. The soil color, the soil temperature, the tillability, the aeration, and so forth. We should be able to understand, go back to your notes, go back to your study guides, and look at these functions of soil, as well as with the knowledge and understanding of soil data, you should be able to make sure that your production units are economical. So you should be in a position to utilize the soil in a manner that will promote and maximize productivity. Soil is susceptible to soil erosion. What are some of the farming practices that we can employ to combat soil erosion? Now, you would struggle to list these simple, your terraces, your windbreakers, your soil zero cultivation, flood dam, if you struggle to understand what is soil erosion, which is just a basic concept. At the level of the concept, know and understand what is soil erosion and what are some of the practices, farming practices that we can employ to make sure that soil erosion is reduced. Very, very importantly, we have these two concepts as well, terracing and contour plowing. You should be able to differentiate between those two. If you look at your previous question papers, you always have this. Sometimes it will be assessed in the form of pictures, where you will have pictures demonstrating a certain plowing. You should be able to say and identify that this is terracing or this is contours, and also why it has to be done that way. Very, very importantly. I remember I said soil data. Soil, you have soil drainage here, pH scale, how it is improved, as well as pH scale interpretation. Now, listen to this one. It's very important. We said soil data says something to us. It's very important to know this pH scale and how the readings are interpreted within the context of knowing the soil pH, because we are going to the production of certain agricultural produce. It could be cabbage or spinach or whatever. Those produce, for them to grow, they need a certain pH, and then you should also be in a position to improve the soil. And then you need to know how to interpret the pH scale, that is power of hydrogen ions that are found in that particular soil. So the pH scale, as we all know, that it ranges from 0 to 14. 14 is the maximum. So where 7 is neutral, anything below 7, it means the soil is acidic. Anything above 7, it means the soil is alkaline. Now, there are crops that are tolerant to acid soil. There are crops that are tolerant to alkaline soil. And there are crops that are tolerant to neutral soil, which is around 7. Now, it's very important to also understand that we also have extremes. For example, if your pH indicates that you have is around 1, 2, or 3, that means it is the extreme end of what? Of the pH scale. That soil is full of acid. So you'd need a lot of agricultural lime, dolomitic lime, and other fertilizers to bring it back to closer to 6 or 5, around there, so that it is the acid soil that will tolerate the production of certain crops. Same applies when you go to the extreme right of the pH scale, where you will have your 7, then you have your 14 there. This is alkaline, and below 7, we said it is acidic. Now, then you have here your gypsum, your calcium. These are some of the fertilizers that you can use to improve the pH levels of the soil. Now, in your previous question papers, you were asked, you could be asked, who knows, you were asked to also list the fertilizers that can be used to correct a certain pH. So that suggests to you that you need to know your pH scale, you need to know what fertilizers can be used. I've mentioned your agricultural lime, your dolomitic lime, and your calcitic lime, your gypsum, and the like. These are some of the fertilizers. Go back and revise that one. Right, if, for example, you have understood all of those, soil, the pH, the color, the drainage, and everything. Now, the planning of the production processes. Why do we have to plan for these production processes? Production process is a cycle. So in that cycle, you should be able to identify during which phase of the cycle would you expect many farming activities. Your peak times that we're talking about here, your breeding season here, your embryo transplantation, your new sprays, your toxins, your growth hormones, new fodder crops. And these are some of the examples. In terms of your production processes, when are you going to have many? So you should factor all of those in your planning, because you are so focused on making sure that you maximize your planning. And then you also have this a bit of financial planning in this question too. What is critical here is that in as much as we are doing farm planning, at some point we need to consider some of the finances. Here, you should be able to understand the description of the following budgets: land, soil usage, crop production, and then you need some finances. And this budget here will be linked to your production processes. For example, you should be able to know what is a farm budget. How does it differ from the enterprise budget? How does the enterprise budget differ from a partial budget, a maintenance budget, a cash flow budget? You should be able to identify that. Because sometimes you are given statements. You are given statements with a description, and as a learner, we expect you to read that statement with understanding, so that you should be in a position to say, this description is about maintenance budget, or this description is about enterprise budget, or this description is about all the budgets, hence we call them the whole farm budget. But when we talk about the enterprise budget, say, for example, in this particular farm, you have broiler production, you have layers, you have cabbage production, you have broccoli production. So those are different production enterprises. Each one of those will have what? The enterprise budget, different enterprise budgets on that one farm. And then still, we expect you to put them, and then you have what? The whole farm budget. But remember, as you are doing this different enterprise budget, your income statement, your trial balance, your cash flow, each of these enterprise budget, it has to be there. You must know the inflow and the outflow in each production enterprises. Please don't confuse that. Let's move to the next point here. Here, again, is the continuation of farm planning, physical and land use. As you plan, you know the production enterprise of your farm. You know the production enterprise cycle. So you plan, you have your planning interval, your short term, your medium term, and the long term, with all the years that are there. You also have your daily task, your routine task, daily task or weekly task. So you need to plan that, and you link this with your planning horizon. So we are instilling the element of making sure that there is a planning horizon, plan for a day, plan for a week, you plan for a year, you plan for medium term, you plan for a long term. Because we want your farming planning to be sustainable, and there are benefits. So you should know what would be the disadvantage if you don't plan in that particular farm. As the farmer, you have goals. What is it that you want to achieve in the medium term to the long term? Earlier on, I talked about food security. I talked about making sure that we sustain the supply and the demand in our communities. Now, we need to have goals. So hence, with this plan, you should be able to track your goals, whether are you on course or you are off course. That is very, very critical. And the standard upon which you want the task to be achieved in this particular farm, the standard and the goals, that is very, very critical. Hence, you will also eliminate inefficiencies, things or activities that are just not making a contribution. So you are expected to make sure that you eliminate these inefficiencies. So in other words here, we want to make sure that you spot opportunities as the entrepreneur. you spot those opportunities, you understand what are some of the inefficiencies that you need to address going forward, because you have the medium term as well as the long term. Remember, your short term, your weekly, your daily activities, they build up to your medium term, and your medium term, they build up to the long term. So we need to avoid a situation where you are at a long term or medium term only to find that you still have activities that are not making a positive contribution to your production. Now, let's move to the next. Let's look at this question. You see here, you have two pictures. Remember earlier on here, I talked about knowing the key verbs that are commonly used. In the previous question papers, there are pictures. I'm definitely sure that even in the upcoming question papers, there will be pictures. And then pictures, they say more than what you can see. So we expect you learners to make sure that you bring back all what you were taught. You bring back all those concepts. You bring back your interpretations and the applications of those concepts that you were taught. And these concepts, they are in the previous question papers. For example here, this is what I'm illustrating here. It's resource use regarding the enterprise. Here you have cabbages here, and then you also have these dairy cows here. And it's part of farm planning. So in other words, you plan your farm such that you will have places where you will have patches of cabbage production and areas where it will be for grazing and areas where it will be for buildings, because somewhere, somehow you will have to introduce your diversification, that is your agritourism, where it comes in. Now, let's look at this picture here showing cabbages. Information about the soil. For these cabbages to be produced, one has to understand the type of soil, the soil temperature, the pH of the soil, as well as the rainfall, the patterns, the seasons, and so forth. But if you look at this picture here, it's about pastures here. It's about the carrying capacity. In other words, in your planning, you should factor in how many animals do you have. Do you have enough land so that as you use that land, it is accommodating a sizable number of animals. That's where the issues of carrying capacity comes in, the issues of overgrazing comes in, rotational grazing comes in. Land usage, that is very, very critical. And whilst you are there, we've used money to buy fertilizers, you've used money to buy these cows, and you also make use of some machines, that is mechanization. You also have some laborers there. You also have some pesticides here to spray here. You also have some herbicides to spray here. So all of these, they are integrated. So I want you learners to, each time you are given a picture in the examination, go beyond what is in front of you. Because it could be the examiner, through the usage of a picture, was hoping to trigger a certain direction. So check those. Hence, I said it's important to look at the action verbs, identify. So 2 pictures here, then you have all these narratives here. Very, very critical. If you go back to your previous question papers, look at those pictures, and then you see what is it that was depicted there. Let's look at this one again. Farm planning. Here, what is critical is the farming system, also called the production system. Now, if you look at this one here, you have your commercial farming system, subsistence farming system, the precision farming system, as well as your extensive farming systems. So with these farming systems, they should not be confused with the farming methods, of which we'll also come to that. Now, as part of your revision and exam readiness, you should be able to define what is a farming system. You should be able to define what is a farming method. You should be able to see the differences between a farming system as well as a farming method. Now, it's very important, learners, to be able to identify the pictures that are depicting or showing a farming system and the pictures that are showing a farming method. You have farming system and a farming method. The two are not the same. And you must also be able to see that. What I'm trying to illustrate here is that, as you can see, you have your commercial, your subsistence, your precision, your extensive. In the examination, if you are given pictures, you must be in a position to see that this picture is showing extensive farming system. You must be able to see that this picture is showing what? A commercial farming system. So the two pictures that I have here, this one, it shows what? Your precision farming, the one with your satellite, your stations, your robot, your smart sensors. It shows you what? Your precision farming, smart agriculture. And then where you have this chicken here, it shows you your subsistence farming, because it's just the open field here. They're just roaming around. In the examination, you should be able to identify those pictures and get all the marks that are there. Easy pickings, these ones. Now, let's move on. Again here, remember earlier on I said differentiate farming systems and farming method. Here we are now. These are your some of your farming systems, and then here you have your farming methods. As you can see, it is illustrated by the pictures here. Look at the pictures. That's why it's very important here to be able to analyze a picture that is in your question papers. So I'm asking you, learners, to scan your environment, to observe what farming systems and farming methods that are practiced. Because these farming systems and methods, they are just done in our communities. As we drive around, you should be able to see that, oh, this is what we were taught in class, and this is what we saw also in the question papers. So your agone farming, intensive production, extensive, as well as your semi-intensive production methods. Once again, farming methods are not the same as the farming systems. They are not the same. You must be able to differentiate that. And then we also have this one here, number 7, farm management. Now, here we talk about farming methods flowing from the previous slides, the identification and the observation of those examples. You should be in a position to see the same intensive production versus your extensive production or the free range. You should be able to identify intensive production, organic farming methods, as well as the usage of your GIS, Global Information Systems, your colors, your imaginary. You should be able to see those in your previous question papers, because all of these, they form part of your precision farming methods and as precision farming in animal production. Now, very, very importantly, when we talk of precision farming methods, it does not necessarily mean that it's only applicable or used when we are talking about crop production. It's used also when we're talking about animal production, usage of drones and the like. Precision farming methods in farm division, precision farming method in animal production. You're taking your remote cameras, your geofencing and the like. So this picture here, it shows us the drones that are used as one of the examples here, how these drones are used in farming methods. Let's move on to the next slide. This slide here is about the budget. If you look at the budget here, if you look at the budget, remember earlier on we talked about the enterprise budget. We talked about this enterprise budget, and then we talk about the whole budget. We talk about the maintenance budget. So if you look at this presentation, the financial planning, in as much as you plan for land use, you plan for the technologies that will be used, you must also plan for the finances that will be used. What is a budget, and how is a farm budget prepared, and what are the different types of budgets? We mentioned cash flow, we mentioned income and expenses statement, we mentioned trial balance. You must be able to define what is the cash flow, as well as the projection, and that's the movement of the money in and out of your agri business. So that is very important. A budget that shows the inflow and the outflow of money in a business over a particular period. And you must link this budget, link it to the production cycle. You have your production cycle. So your production cycle, then it must be linked to how your budget has been planned, your inflow as well as your outflow. Then you have different types of budget and different types of capital, and the examples, you must be able to identify those should you be given pictures. You must be able to identify movable capital, should be able to identify working or floating capital, as well as the examples that are given. For example, when we talk of fixed capitals, you should be knowing this by now. We're talking about the dams here, the fence, as well as the buildings. Movable capitals, and we're talking about the equipment, the tools, the implements, the livestock that we want to use to maximize production. When we talk about the floating, the capital, that is your feed, animal feed, your fertilizers, your fuel, those that are consumables on daily and weekly basis. So you must know that all of these, they involve some kind of a budget. They involve some kind of planning. So it's very much important that in as much as you plan for land use, how you want to use your land, you need to make sure that you link that to the budget. So for exam purposes, know how to define what is a budget, know how to define a cash flow budget, understand what projection and movement of the money is all about, income and expenses, as well as the trial balance. And sometimes these statements here, you are given in the question papers. So they expect you to analyze, identify what this statement is showing. Now, there is also a certain amount of labor that is required there, as well as the management of those laborers. Hence, you should be able to understand that farm management it involves a combination and the coordination of all farming resources. What we mean by the farming resources, all farming resources here, we're talking about the land, as we said earlier on, we're talking about the finances, we're talking about the technologies involved, and now we're talking about the employees on that particular farm. They have to be coordinated. So this is a management function. Why do we have to bother with the coordination? It's because we want to maximize profit. Now, there are 5 management tasks that the agricultural manager must fulfill in respect of all management activities. We're talking about planning, we've said about that one, organization on that farm, motivation of laborers, and providing leadership, and you control, you coordinate, and you evaluate that production enterprise. For example, let's say your production enterprise is layers. You have to plan when to procure those layers. You have to make sure that the organization, the employees are motivated, you provide leadership, you control, you coordinate, and you evaluate whether the productivity is maximized. When are you going to have different types of laborers there? What level of skills and competencies do we expect, as well as the education of and training of those laborers? Are they able to use the technologies that are employed in your farm? What are some of those technologies? Because they are expected to be able to use those technologies. As a way of concluding this presentation, I'm sure that with all the approaches, the key concepts, the interpretations, as well as the applications of these different agricultural terminologies, it's very important to understand that in agricultural management practices, we don't only define and memorize concepts. Having defined and memorized, we go a step further to say, how is this particular concept, how is it applied in real life situations? How is it used? Further also to say, can I be able to identify that this scenario is showing or depicting a usage of that particular concept? So that's why, in conclusion, I'm asking you, dear learners, to form study groups, and these study groups must be committed to the cause of success. You must be committed to the cause of success, making sure that you read and review this presentation, you conduct your self-assessment to check your understanding of these key concepts. You revise your previous question papers, you practice answering all the questions. I'm sure that with this question to revision approach, you should be able to get out of these 50 marks, at least you should be around 30 to 35 marks, if not all the 50 marks. So thank you very much. We have come to the end of this question to revision. Next time I'll come with question 3. Thereafter, it will be question 4, which will be the last one. Thank you very much. Be ready and enjoy your revision. We've come to the end of our lesson. You can leave your questions on the comments. Don't forget to leave the name of your school. So we'll give shout outs. Please share, recommend, and subscribe to YouTube channel. Thank you for watching. See you on our next lesson.